What opportunities are available for civil engineering professionals in renewable energy or climate change or other interesting trending fields? Because there's a lot of them and we're just not aware of them. However, in today's episode, I'm thrilled to have with me Paul Lee. Paul is a civil engineer, but he's also an energy policy analyst for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability in Los Angeles. An interesting job, right? Something that he transitioned into from a civil engineering career. So Paul's going to talk about all these different opportunities that are available in civil engineering and how you can take steps to investigate them for yourself. Let's jump right in. Before we dive in, we'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, PPI, a leader in engineering exam prep for the FE and PE exams. PPI provides expert prep courses and study resources designed to help you pass the FE and PE exams the first time. PPI's live online courses include hours of lectures, problem-solving demonstrations, exam strategy sessions, office hours, and a passing guarantee. Check out PPI today at ppi2pass.com to see all the options available for FE and PE exam prep. Now let's dive into today's episode. All right, now I'm excited to welcome our guest onto the podcast today. Paul Lee is an energy policy analyst at the City of Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Sustainability. We'll hear a little bit about that in a few minutes. But Paul, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So just to get us started, Paul, tell us a little bit about your career background, your journey up to date, kind of, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. So I am a civil engineer by training. I think that's one of the reasons why you brought me on. But I really wanted to do a lot of work in sustainability, fighting climate change. And really one thing had really led to another, which is how I ended up in this field of policymaking as opposed to engineering. But I really started out, I studied civil engineering over at UCLA, but I really wanted to have a more expansive view of kind of like my role within the profession. I minored in urban planning and earth sciences. And from there, I did a master's at Berkeley on civil infrastructure and climate change. And kind of like opened my eyes to like different opportunities that civil engineers had in combating climate change, building energy systems, like reducing carbon dioxide emissions. And from there, I worked at a utility for about 4 to 5 years. And from there, I just got really into policymaking, like using my technical experience and helping to communicate that to decision makers. And I saw an opportunity to work for the mayor. I took it. And for the last year and a half, I've been doing some real hardcore policymaking on like we have to do X, Y, and Z to reduce our carbon emissions. We have to do so and so to get our grid to 100% clean energy, to decarbonize our buildings and transportation systems. So really just started off as a civil engineer, but learned a lot of things outside the discipline, and one thing led to another, and here I am working for an elected official.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said about, making that transition into policy, because I feel like that's something that maybe a lot of civil engineers might not think of just because we're not that exposed to it. We're mostly focused on the technical stuff early in our careers, but the policy is where, real change can happen, of course. Right. And so I'm wondering, in terms of that decision for you, like what was it that drove that? Was that some of the work that you did in your master's degree, or what made you like really get interested in policy?
Yeah, I think I always had an inkling for policy, just having taken some public policy classes in my undergrad and graduate program, and then being in a master's right now, it's strictly in public administration. So I kind of understood the language for a little bit, and I really wanted an opportunity to practice it. And so it wasn't a gigantic shift in career. So I kind of had some experience with it, a little bit of experience while I was an engineer, just interfacing with the public, with elected officials. And so it wasn't a jarring transition, but it was a big jump from doing technical calculations to more writing memos, writing speeches, doing some overarching policy recommendations. But I'm still using the engineering mindset, using critical decision making, applying analytics, being as objective as possible. And I think the skills that you learn as an engineer can really be transferable to policymaking, I think.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's an important part of it's an important part of civil engineering, because we can have all these ideas for great designs and things that we want to accomplish, but without the policy, we may not be able to actually get them to happen. So I think having someone like yourself who has a good understanding of civil engineering, being able to help hopefully drive some policy and get involved at the level of like the mayor's office, I think can be very beneficial for our community, quite frankly, right? To make things happen, hopefully. So
Mhm.
that's awesome. So before you worked for the mayor's office, you had a couple of different positions where you were working on projects related to energy and renewable energy. I know you worked at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Maybe you can talk just a little bit about, renewable energy in terms of, some of the challenges that civil engineers might face in working in those types of projects.
Yeah, I think renewable energy is going to be such a huge field for civil engineers, especially as, California in particular, and then the rest of the United States really wants to get off fossil fuels and try and go 100% clean energy. Civil engineer, we're going to have to build and sometimes literally move mountains to build these huge infrastructure systems like solar farms, wind farms, energy storage systems. I know geothermal, all of which will need civil engineers to move the dirt, to put steel on the ground, to do project management, to do the surveying. And so there's a huge opportunity out there for civil engineers to really reshape the landscape and put renewable energy systems like on the ground. Like, going to have tens of thousands of miles of transmission lines. And I think one of the biggest challenges, I think there's a few challenges that aren't strictly engineering related, but then are going to be huge hurdles that we're going to have to overcome, is like the amount of land that we'll need, both on people's rooftops and out in the deserts and out in farmlands, just the sheer volume. I think one project that I worked on in out in the desert was about a 2,000 acre solar farm. It was like the first grid scale solar and battery system for the city of LA. It's called Beacon Solar and Energy Storage System. And yeah, it's the size of a small city. And that's just one project. And we're going to need dozens, if not hundreds, of these projects that are going to have to just be built. And so just the sheer volume and scale of the projects that will need to happen, like solar, wind, geothermal, but then also just kind of getting those things permitted, approved, built, getting everybody on board with building these, like any large infrastructure system. And then you have a whole host of other engineering challenges that are a little bit more electrical and mechanical in nature. So I don't know if the civil engineers really want to delve there, but I think there are kind of key challenges in energy storage. Like the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and we're going to need massive new technologies in terms of energy storage to really kind of like balance out the grid, make sure that we can have like 24/7 clean energy.
Interesting. I mean, listen, one of the things that I can say just from talking with you here so far is that it's really clear that there are just so many opportunities in civil engineering, period, from whether you want to get involved in policy, renewable energy. We're going to talk in a minute about climate change. I mean, and I think that that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have Paul on, is because I think a lot of civil engineers, when they graduate, they really don't understand the breadth of what they can accomplish or the different opportunities that are available to them, because we kind of get into the silos of our educational background, like the undergraduate courses that we take, whatever they may be, geotechnical, structural analysis, hydrology. And like, we're just thinking in those buckets, but there are so many things that maybe encompass all of those things or have different of, combinations of those together. So I think that's one of the things that I'm thinking about already, Paul, just from talking to you for a few minutes, that there's just a unlimited amount of opportunities for civil engineers.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many opportunities. The only problem, I think, just like one problem is that there isn't like a well-established pipeline from undergraduate civil engineering to working in the renewable energy field. Like structural engineers, you do your structural undergrad, you get your master's, and you have like a dozen or so companies that you can just apply for and get a job doing structural engineering. With civil engineering, it's not as obvious, but you have traditional companies that are doing site planning for solar farms. You have traditional construction companies that are doing project management for these companies, and so you just have to like look a little bit harder, but the opportunities are definitely out there.
Yeah, that's interesting too, and that may present an opportunity in the future. And I know ASCE has helped with this a little bit, and we'll talk about ASCE in a little bit, but in terms of like thinking about the undergraduate curriculum, I mean, it's hard to keep evolving a curriculum because there's only a certain number of credits we have time for, and there's certain requirements, but having some kind of course that can turn us on or turn students on to the different types of possible opportunities like renewable energy and things of that nature could be very beneficial in the future. But again, I know there's a lot to balance there with that. But we'll see what comes of that. But I do want to talk a little bit more about climate change, because you did mention that you did your master's around, that was one of the key things that you focused on in your master's degree. What is the role of civil engineers in combating climate change? I mean, we hear about it so much, but specifically related to civil engineering.
Yeah. I think I could answer this question in so many ways. I think there's kind of like the micro level that civil engineers can, just immediately have an impact on climate change. And it just sort of gives this macro society-wide system level influence that civil engineers can hopefully have years down the line. And so like immediately, I think just in terms of material, like better material usage. So definitely concrete, asphalt, cement production is still a high contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. It's just the nature of the materials. And so just being able to spec out low carbon concrete, maybe using better materials, like using things called life cycle assessments on their building materials, like as you're designing structural systems, like considering like the carbon footprint of the materials that you're using, or going to a vendor that has a lower carbon footprint, like maybe your steel is a little bit greener or your concrete's a little bit greener, so you can dramatically just start shaving off carbon emissions right away in just the way that you spec your structural systems. And then from there, I think there's a little bit more of like a macro scale, because sometimes civil engineers often work with urban planners or policymakers to do like system design, like our transportation systems or our entire energy systems, and just making recommendations about like, yeah, like maybe we can build a new fossil power plant, or maybe we can build instead a solar farm and maybe some batteries instead that can do just about the same thing. There's also opportunities in like widespread EV planning and large rail infrastructures. Like, do we really need another lane of highway, or can we replace it with maybe like a rail system? Like, do we need to build, things for, fossil fuel combustion cars? Maybe we can just build out more EV charging stations instead, and kind of like work with urban planners and the EV industry to really make electric vehicles more of a thing and more accessible to folks. So I think that's a little bit more on the macro scale and not as obvious, like a little bit more in the transportation engineering realm. But I think there are just real ways that civil engineers can start thinking about kind of like reducing the carbon emissions just in our daily practice, and just kind of the way that we can advocate and work in fields that can have a more systemic influence.
I think that's great. I like the idea of looking at it from the micro and the macro level, because again, what that tells me is that civil engineers with different experience levels and different positions can be helpful, right? At the micro level, if you're very technical in nature, you're doing, work where you have to spec out concrete, asphalt, things of that nature, you can have an impact. But also at a leadership level, whether it's a policy level or, different levels, which is important, because I think like you want everyone to feel like they can make an impact. And it sounds like from what you're saying is that really civil engineers at every level of their career can make an impact with regards to climate change. You just have to think through ways to do it.
Yeah. You just have to look a little. You don't need to have the job title of like sustainability engineer
Right.
or director of climate change or whatever. Like, as like I would argue that like most civil engineers can have a meaningful impact. It might just take a little bit of work to research or advocate. I know it might not be well established within your respective positions, but then just voicing your concerns and wanting to do more. Maybe you want this project that you're working on to be LEED certified or Envision certified, which are like green rating standards to kind of promote sustainability within the infrastructure that we build. So just small things that we can really do. And then just getting the word out, just making people aware that these opportunities are available.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about the title, because I always tell people you don't have to be the president of a company to be a leader. And I feel like it's the same thing that you're saying. You don't have to be a climate change specialist to impact climate change or help to reduce climate change. You could just be a civil engineer, and there's a million probably different things you could do in your jobs every day that can help contribute in some way, shape, or form. It's just about thinking about it, and hopefully One of the ideas of having Paul on the podcast here is just to hopefully, make civil engineers aware of it, that you can contribute in some way, regardless of your title. I'm sure in some way everyone can. All right. So, Paul, we already talked about earlier that you work for a politician now, and you made a transition from a civil engineer who was doing, more technical things into a policy making role. Now that you've had some time, I know it hasn't been a ton of time, but you've had some time to transition into this role. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition has gone in terms of, I would imagine taking a job like that, for me, one of the things I would think about is, how am I going to make this transition? So maybe you can share some kind of lessons learned so far from your experience.
Yeah, it was yeah, like I said before, I had a little bit of taste of it through school and a little bit of it while I was at my local utility, but I just went in head first. I just start doing the work right away. And so I think some of the things that were a little bit took a little bit of a learning curve was the writing, the communication piece. So I went from doing a little bit more technical writing and analytic reports into things that are more public facing and things that have to convince legislators or politicians. So things that are more simplified, condensed, that tells a story that kind of spurs up more of an emotional response, as opposed to these technical reports with like a summary table with recommendations of like, this is our least cost alternative, or this is like our most impactful alternative based on like the engineering calculations. And so that part was the most challenging, just putting my mindset of almost like a PR person, of telling that story that can convince people, convince the layperson that this is the right thing to do based on the story that we can tell. And so, but I'm still putting my engineering hat on, where I'm doing a deep level analysis of like, what is the right solution? Like maybe doing this project as opposed to another project, or implementing this new program to reduce carbon emissions as opposed to this one, and having like a rigorous analysis on my end on what the best solution is, but creating that story, creating that narrative that can really convince the public and decision makers to adopt the solution.
Wow, that's great. And, I would imagine that when you make a transition like that, there's really two big challenges. One of them being the hard skills, like you just referenced, some of the writing and things that you have to do that you're not used to doing as a technical professional, which it sounds like you're navigating well and learning kind of on as you go, which is great. But I think there's also probably like a philosophical challenge of like, now I'm doing policy as opposed to engineering. And it sounds to me like, from what you said earlier, what may have been helpful for you, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but you had some interest in policy and you were interested in it in the past, which I would think would making that leap might be a little bit easier. Whereas I could see a civil engineer who maybe wasn't thinking about it that much and they saw the opportunity, that could be a challenge. So do you think that helped you because you had interest in policy?
I think so. It definitely kind of introduced me to this space. But as far as like being prepared for it, I don't think any amount of like schoolwork can prepare you for the real world. Not to like criticize academia, but I think just that real world experience is something else. And the only way to really learn is to just learn by doing. And like within my office, there have been a lot of engineers that kind of rotates through the mayor's office, that are in this intersection between the technical and the policy. And a lot of them really do thrive. Like they're able to navigate this space, they're able to learn the skills well. They're able to be like this really relied upon technical expert that can navigate both the engineering side and also the policy side. So I don't think I'm the exception. I think most engineers can have the capacity to do what I do. It just needs a little bit of training, a little bit of experience.
Yeah. And I think, like you said earlier, being open to it and understanding that it's even a viable possibility to do it. I mean, I think that's always a big first step in anything. Like if people don't know that these opportunities are available, then they may not seek them out, right? And I think, again, that's one of the reasons that we really were excited to talk to Paul today, to kind of get that idea out there, that there are different things you can do as a civil engineer, where you're still going to lean on your technical background. You may not be doing like calculations and stuff anymore, but there's other things you can do, which I know some civil engineers would prefer that. And that's I think hopefully the value here. All right. So we're going to switch it up a little bit now, because we want to talk about the movies. Paul's going to be a movie star, at least in the eyes of civil engineers. So, Paul, you were chosen for the lead role in the new ASCE film called Cities of the Future, Reimagining Our World. So, first of all, tell us how you ended up being chosen for this movie.
That is still, I'm still wondering about that as we speak. But I'd like to imagine, like my years of involvement within ASCE. I was
Yeah.
chosen as a new face in 2019. I think that got me a little bit of exposure. And I think just I had an interesting story to tell. I had an interesting and inspiring story to tell to the future generation, which is that I'm helping to plan the city of the future. I'm not necessarily building it quite yet. It's not 2050. It's not 100 years from now, obviously. But I'm helping to put the groundwork for a future city to thrive, which is transitioning LA to going 100% carbon free or net zero carbon by mid-century, and then trying to get LA to 100% clean energy well before that, in a little over a decade. And so I'm working on building the city of the future. And as a civil engineer, I think that's a very interesting story that can inspire a lot of kids to pursue this field. Like, I think it's important for students to realize that we have a hopeful future. Like, it's not going to be, our world's not going to be decimated by climate change. Like, we can do things to both mitigate the impacts, so to prevent climate change from being as bad as it is, but also building cities that can thrive in the face of climate change. So even if we'll have extreme heat, extreme weather events, more storms and climate hazards, that we can build cities that are resilient and can thrive and be these prosperous cities that that we design around climate change, and we're working around it and building a better future.
That's awesome. So congratulations on that. I think it's great. I think the movie itself is obviously a great initiative, and the fact that you were chosen is awesome, and I'm excited to see how it all works out. And to the extent that you're allowed to, what can you share about the movie? Is it basically going to be different civil engineers that are going to be sharing different stories, or?
It'll be, I don't know how I'll speak to like what I've been involved with so far. I think the
Okay.
script is still in progress. We're still filming, but we're going to be featuring at a minimum, I think we're going to be featuring three at a minimum three cities: LA, Amsterdam, and Singapore. And we're going to be working with innovators, engineers, in these various cities that are really helping to make their respective cities like the city of the future.
Hmm.
Like in Singapore, the one of the most greenest cities out there, that's really integrating nature, because nature provides a cooling. It's really hot in Singapore, but nature provides a cooling effect. It really provides health and well-being to its residents. I think Amsterdam is like the bike capital of the world. You don't really see too many cars in the city center. Like, everyone bikes, everyone's healthier for it, the air is better for it, people are safer for it. And really talking to these experts about how that came to be, and also other innovations that these cities are doing just to prepare for the city of the future. And obviously LA trying to go 100% clean energy as fast as we're trying to. So really talking to these technical experts about their journey in the present, and then kind of like their vision for what cities can be, like in their respective cities.
That's awesome. No, it's really exciting. And let me ask you this question. Is it, in terms of being able to have the time to do this, is it something you have to travel a lot? Like, what does that look like in relation to
Yeah,
your
I
everyday
took
life?
yeah, I was in Amsterdam for 1 to 2 weeks. I was in Singapore for a little over a week. So that was one of the most exciting parts about making this movie, was just being able to travel and see the world. And like, I think I became a better engineer for it, just being able to see the world kind of outside the United States and talking to these experts too.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been really interesting stuff. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to wrap up by putting Paul on the civil engineering hot seat. We'll be right back. All right, we are back with Paul Lay. Paul is a civil engineer, now working in policies. We've talked a lot about how he made that transition. He's focused on, helping with climate change going forward, contributing. Civil engineers, we can really contribute to kind of mitigating climate change, and that's one of his focuses for sure. And so, Paul, we're going to wrap up here. We're going to throw a couple of questions at you that we call the civil engineering hot seat questions. Just bounce them off you, career related. And the first thing I'm going to ask you is, Do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day, whether it's a morning routine, a lunchtime routine, just like something that you do consistently on a daily basis that has contributed to your success in your career?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of, I think my life has been a little chaotic as of late, trying to balance work and school, and travel. But I think it's a cliche, but definitely coffee helps in my morning routine. But I really try and stay active and spend quality time with friends and family as much as I can. I think just healthy body, healthy mind, um, having a healthy work-life balance, I think it's definitely keep me grounded and prevent me from really burning out. But as far as like other rituals, I'm trying to get into a rhythm, but with all the chaos
Yeah,
and changes, it's been hard to get into a steady rhythm. But coffee and exercise, I strongly advocate its
that's good.
efficacy.
Yeah, I would imagine it's hard for a movie star to have good routines. No, but I think spending time with friends and family is really important. I think we live in a world, especially with everything that's happened with COVID, where I see a lot of engineers that are kind of getting more burnt out because you kind of can be working crazy hours. Since you're home working, you could be working all the time for those that are still home and remote. So it's good to hear some of those things for sure. So Paul, do you happen to have a book or books that have been helpful for you in your career that you say, hey, that's the one book I really remember that it helped me a lot, or not so much?
Um, okay, so a lot of the books that I've read and I've like changed my view on the world are a little esoteric. They're like very like specialized in like a specific field. I read like all sorts of books on like math and like the human condition, philosophy. I read like memoirs of certain like high profile individuals. But I would say for me as a civil engineer, especially in Los Angeles, something that really kind of helped me pursue the space in the beginning was actually called Cadillac Desert. It's a story about how LA and various parts of the American West got their water and just kind of like the fragility of our water system. And it's like California is in a mega drought and we're using water systems that are just so susceptible to climate change. And it was just a book that was like very eye-opening. Like we thought as engineers that we can be kind of we can dominate nature and control it the way we do, but in reality it's just we have very little control over it. It was more like a humbling book, just a different perspective to see the way that we build our infrastructure. For those interested in water, that's a book that I highly recommend. And then
Interesting.
another book that I kind of like love, and the movie was great, is The Martian. It's
Okay.
really about like putting yourself in an engineering mindset, solving one problem after another, can save your life or change things or really kind of make a big impact by putting that calm, by really understanding the problem, putting that engineering mindset and solving one problem after another can really lead to big things.
Awesome. A couple of books that we haven't had heard much on the podcast, and this is our like 200 and some odd something episode. So I always like hearing about new books. So happy to hear that. All right, just a couple more. Thinking back so far on some of the managers that you may have had in your career, and certainly not asking you to name names or anything, but just thinking of your managers and the ones that maybe you've liked or you've had good relationships with, what made them good managers? Just trying to understand, like in the civil engineering world, like what are some of the characteristics you think of good, strong managers?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of my bosses from my previous job at my local utility. I think some of the traits that I really had valued looking back is that they were so focused on my personal growth that they put their staff above the work, which I don't, it's hard to articulate how that is, but they were really kind of empowering the individual, making sure that they can do the work, that they're being properly challenged, that they had everything that they need, and they felt like an employee that felt belonged at the company and that could thrive in the company. And so less worried about key performance indices, less concerned about the bottom line, but really about your own personal growth. And that's something that I really took to heart. And then as I took on interns and as I had to take on a little bit more leadership positions, that's something that I really tried to embody. That it's not about me. Like if I'm in a team, it's about the people doing the work. It's about empowering them, making sure that they're fully equipped, and then that they're in a good, state of mind to thrive within this company. So that was like some of my managers from my previous company, and then the manager that I have right now is just such a amazing individual, so smart, so articulate, like has some of the most highest performing as far as like her writing, her speaking, the relationships that she's built. And I treat her more as kind of like this boss lady that I can just like learn from by osmosis. And so kind of like different traits and different attributes that I've really kind of learned from different managers. And so yeah, I think it's really about inspiring. I think good managers inspire people, and then it really both inspires and cultivates the people that work for them.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, I've got one last question for you, Paul. We call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you got into an elevator with let's say a young civil engineer, someone starting out their career, and you only had about 30 or 40 seconds to give him or her career advice, like based on your journey to date, what would you tell them?
I would say don't worry about the future in terms of making perfect decisions. So I know that's something that a lot of young people worry. So like, am I going to the right school? Am I applying for the right internship? Am I doing all these right things? I would say take a deep breath. I would say understand what you really care about, and see what opportunities are out there for you right now. And pursue something that more or less encapsulates most of the things that you care about. Go to that opportunity position school, give it your all. And from there, you'll find even more opportunities from there. And so don't worry too much about your immediate present decisions. Just relax a little bit, work hard, keep your options open, and eventually you'll finding your dream job. It just takes a little bit of patience and open-mindedness.
Awesome. Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast. I wish you the best in your position with policy. I'm sure you'll go on to do great things. And I also wish you the best in finishing up with the ASCE film. I know everyone's kind of looking forward to seeing how it turns out. So thanks so much for spending some time with us.
No, this was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Paul. There are so many things that a civil engineer can do, but civil engineers just aren't aware of them. And so we're hoping to interview more professionals like Paul who have a civil engineering background and education and have transitioned into some interesting fields. So if you're interested in learning more about these professions, consider subscribing to our channel here. We do put out videos weekly, and we hope that we can help you engineer your own success. I'll see you next week.